Hello, friends. My name is Host Eric. I'm the host of Talking with Famous People. This video is called INFJ and I. What's it all about? Or something like that. The question is from IAG last. I have a question pertaining to the knowledge functions. Specifically for NI, you said NI knows without direct experience. Like, for example, Sherlock picking up clues and knowing things, but how can they know without direct experience? That is to say, if it's a pattern, didn't they have to see it before and experience it happening? Good question. Also, I wanted to know more about SI as a knowledge function and what exactly you mean it knows by direct experience. I didn't really get clarification on that. I'll post some ideas and see if these are right. I wanted to ask if SI people that have it high in the stack simply take longer for them to recognize patterns, so then they would need many, many instances of them happening to them. Let's say I was watching a psychological anime and I was introduced to a character that was psychologically changing and subtly getting corrupted by the immense power he had. And let's say once I was done with that series, I saw the clues of it happening to somebody else, and it turned out it had changed to a corrupted person who only cared about maintaining his power in himself. Would that be an example of N, since I saw the anime and didn't see it happen in real life? Is that what you mean by direct experience? Yes, basically. It's taking any experience and converting it into a pattern that you can recognize elsewhere is one form of NI. I also wanted to add if some things are maybe, say, obvious. Say like, oh, well, if you would have deliberated about this more, it would have been obvious as to what I meant. It's because I haven't deliberated on this much and I'm just expressing my thoughts, trying to see what you mean. But it's been my experience that I happen to parse out and understand things later on. It was meaningless to ask the question, but yeah. Very possible what you just said there at the end. I'm glad I finally read this whole thing out loud because I didn't quite get all of what you were saying the first time I read it to myself. Yeah, it is quite possible that after knowing that you don't know, you decided to deliberate it out and realize that you had the ability to know by figuring it out more, or by directing more attention to parsing the words that I had used and what they mean and what information that conveys. I broke down your question into three main questions. Your comment into three main questions. How is it possible to know without experience? Number two, how does NI play out in the physical versus representational fields? And number three, do SI-DOM's tool need more examples to establish a pattern? So I wrote out this little paragraph, and then I want to talk about these things in the outline. Overview. Introverted intuition is awareness of fittedness. When expressing in a turn-based ecosystem, as I say, with symbols language like one we're doing right now, one's NI knows the fittedness of a given meaning package with something else. That something else might be a human resource management issue or a non-human resource management issue, which is to say it's either FE or TE. Always paired with an interface function, NI knows without testing or parsing whether or not something's going to play FE or solve TE. This means linking back to a lot of things, existing knowledge about the people, but also knowledge about people in the universal, knowledge about this specific person versus, say, the group of people, etc. Obviously, nobody can know much without some experience. Newborn babies know to suck, for example, but that's about it. The intuitive and sensing kinds of knowing both draw from a person's experiences. The difference is in the framing. An SI person knows that fish restaurants are bad because the SI person had 2 bad experiences at fish restaurants. The NI person has 2 bad experiences at fish restaurants and knows that she doesn't like fish restaurants. And the thing to note here is that both conclusions comprise hasty generalizations, at least from the perspective of an action deliberator like me. But they differ in a significant way. The SI user's experience subsumes the universal. Fish restaurants in general, the universal, must be bad, since that's what my particular experience says. The NI user's experience is subsumed by the universal. Fish restaurants in general can't be bad. There are lots of them and lots of people like them. So the universal rule here must be that I don't like fish restaurants. Now, it's true in both cases that the conclusion is false. Fish restaurants aren't bad, and the person who says I don't like fish restaurants maybe just needs to go to a good fish restaurant that has a certain kind of fish. The difference in how they respond to that circumstance, though, is the SI person is going to be a lot more stubborn regarding the matter than the NI person. Because the NI person is fundamentally universalist regarding things, they're willing to consider, they're susceptible to updating their universal rules by parsing. So, for example, it makes sense for an INFJ to maybe update her universal rules from I don't like fish restaurants to I don't like fish restaurants unless they have miana. Note that the INFJ probably is not going to do the following thing. I don't like fish restaurants, but I like Petrillo's fish restaurant because I like this particular dish there. They're not really likely to do that. They're likely to universalize out from Petrillo's and say they have sea bass at Petrillo's. I like the sea bass there. So then the universal rule they're going to say is I don't like fish restaurants unless they have sea bass. They're still universalizing. But note that the SI Dom, if you do convince them, even though they don't like fish restaurants, that to go to Petrillo's, their conclusion will be, and they do like Petrillo's, their conclusion will be, fish restaurants are bad except for Petrillo's. So that's the difference. The experience subsumes the universal in the SI user, and the universal subsumes the experience in the NI user. And I've written out here some of the distinctions need to be made to understand NI more in full, I guess you'd say. So one thing that NI deals with is identity. In other words, when you have a couple of birds flying in the general vicinity of each other, they're individual birds. When you have a huge group of them flying together, they're a flock of birds. Distinction is about determining those set completion moments where something is distinct from something else. Was that a good movie or a bad movie is a matter of, well, that's really about soundness. Distinction is simply recognizing that two realities are exclusive, and not necessarily because of a given logic. So, I can't both have a healthy relationship with Rachel and secretly have sex with the people on the side. It's not logically exclusive. It's intuitively not going to work. Knowing myself and a lot of other factors wouldn't work. I wouldn't be able to maintain the secret. I wouldn't be able to consistently lie like that without revealing that I'm lying on my face or some other body language. I wouldn't be able to do it without having pangs of conscience. There's a lot of reasons that none of which are inherently determinate on the question, all of which play into the NI truth that's just not going to work. It's wrong. It's evil or whatever you want to say. That's a matter of distinctness, of being able to distinguish between what's decisive in a matter and what's not. Soundness is the quality of the normative quality of introverted intuition, namely good or bad. For NIFE, it's like, is this resonant communicatively? Does it resonate as true universally in a way that could be expressed to people in general? Or TE, NITE, is this effective towards my clearly defined goal? So those are two aspects of identity, distinction and soundness, that are implicit to the thing outside of oneself. What makes NI objective is its knowing about things outside of the self. Process. Responsive vectors. A. Timing and resource management. So there are two responsive vectors that are paired with NI potentially. One is, there's three. Timing, but there's two that are potentially paired. So, like, for number 3 there, FE is about that willingness capacity. TE is about availability cost. If you're an FE person, you're evaluating resources, you're talking about human resources. Is Joe available, willing? Does Joe have the ability and is he willing to contribute to a team effort in the following way. Whereas if you're looking at availability cost, you'd say, how much is it going to hire us how much is it going to cost us to hire somebody to do this job? Versus, I'd like to hire Joe to do this job, but is he capable and willing and interested? Those are the considerations I have, How can I pick the right person for this job? Kind of a combination of the two things. Now, the other two, timing and state change, are universal to NI, and it's about state change is really a form of distinction. It's saying the fact is, a lot of times a single determinant factor will come and collapse an equilibrium into a new equilibrium. So, for example, let's say I'm on stage and I'm killing it as a comedian, and everyone's laughing. But after, in minute 4 of my set, I make a series of racist child molestation jokes, and everyone gets super offended. And at the end of it, I try to make some regular jokes again, but they're not working anymore. Because what's happened there is a state change. What operated under the rules of the initial equilibrium, when that equilibrium became destabilized, it established a new equilibrium on the other side of the Destabilization Act, and that new equilibrium was not a friendly, responsive equilibrium to the person who was talking anymore. In fact, it had a repulsive kind of response to it. Like, I reject what you're attempting a priori because I have changed my status of you in my head. So that's what state change refers to. Timing happens on both the metaphysical and the physical dimensions, and is significant in both. But timing on the metaphysical dimension, if you're talking about real-time timing, then you're either talking about joke telling or you're talking about music or something like that. If you're talking about turn-based timing, then it's a matter of when's a good time to release this album? When's a good time to approach Joe about this tricky issue? All right, so those are timing things that relate to NI. SI timing is definitely very different. SI is all about regimenting your day, knowing in advance from the time you get up to the time you go to sleep. That's about as far a scope as you go, because you're fundamentally operating in an experiential time frame, a real-time time frame. You can't collapse real-time experiential shit into SI experiential knowing in a predictive way beyond the scope of a single day, basically. In other words, I can't know what's going to happen to me today and tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day by going, okay, well, first I've got this, then I've got this, then I've got this, then I've got this. You can only go so far into the future with that sort of predicted SE, predicted follow-through on things. You only go so far into the future, and it's only meaningful or useful to go so far into the future. All I need to know, if I'm an SI Dom, is what I have on the tap for today, from waking up to going to sleep, and maybe a couple of big looming things. Anything else I don't worry about is beyond the scope of the day. That's what happens when you're favoring a physical aspect of a physical knowing function. You know very experientially. You predict very experientially. In contrast, INFJ, Rachel does not ever go, this is what I'm going to do, then this, then this, then this, then this, then this. Never does she do that, because that runs afoul of her nature. Her nature is SI knowing always serves NI knowing. It's subsumed by NI knowing. The experiential knowledge is always secondary to or in service of the universal knowledge. So if you ask her, what are you going to do today? Rachel, what are you doing today?
I'm going to take it easy.
You're going to take it easy?
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm looking for a succession of planned activities and events, please.
Oh.
Can you tell me, like, first I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that, then I'm going to do the other thing?
Am I supposed to?
No. What I'm saying is, if you were to ask an SI Dom, what are you going to do today?
They No.
They would know what they're going to do today.
No, I don't know. All I know is that I have a cold and I have to take care of it today. That's all I know.
Right.
That's
She's
it.
operating on a turn-based time frame. All of the turn-based time considerations can wait. Whatever storylines she's got going on with the world, in other words, let's say she wants to participate in a video, make a video, and in fact, she was talking to me before this about her. She just took a test. And we're going to talk about it shortly. That it doesn't matter whether it's uploaded now or 6 hours from now or tomorrow. After all, we're operating in a turn-based time economy. This is why ENTP starts so many projects and leaves many of them unfinished and doesn't convert them into outcomes. If you operate fundamentally in a turn-based time ecosystem, you assume you have infinite time because everything you're dealing with does. If I'm halfway through a book, I can pick up writing that book again tomorrow, the next day, a month from now, and it will be as though I picked it up, I just continued. There's no loss of where you are and what you're doing because you've been away from it for a while. And so the metaphysical types naturally have trouble with using their time wisely because since we're working in this way on a static turn-based system, we assume all of life must work like that, kind of to begin. And we learn time's precious. We have a finite amount of it and a lot of shit to get done. Okay, so now let's look at the predictive vectors. Extrapolation is positive feedback loops. I note this pattern going on in the status quo, and I anticipate that it will continue as it's going on right now, and thus the future will look like this. That's extrapolation, using patterns to predict things that aren't currently so. For example, an NI user is likely to predict that, say, cognitive functions are blowing up and they're going to get big or something. It's mostly an availability bias plus intuition about positive feedback loops. Reduction is another predictive vector for NI, and it's about negative feedback loops. That a given thing that's meowing is just going to meow because it's not actually, it doesn't have any vector momentum. It's, in fact, the things about it that are popping are things that easily get squashed down and lost in the wash. In other words, negative feedback loops. Another vector is archetype. This is for the FE vector and determinism of the TE vector. Archetype is mythological, which means it's the logic of mythology. Teleological is the logic of utility, the logic of TE. Nicely TE in the front of it, right? Logical refers to conditional logic, the logic of TI. Ontological, the logic of self or being. You probably could call, you'd say ontological is NI. Analogical is extroverted intuition, using analogy. Physiological is SI probably. You could say SE. Autological, or the logic of the self, is FI. And the other S, if you call physiological SI, then physics is SE. It doesn't have a logic. Physics is the logic of the physical world. Physiological refers to the logic of the body. Metaphysics refers to the logic of the metaphysical world. So the thing is, these concepts that I'm linking here to cognitive functions in general are not things I'm making up. They existed a long time ago. This distinction between different kinds of logics and stuff. The only thing that cognitive functions helps explain is why it is you prioritize meh or meh versus meh. So the mythological use of NI is one that deals in archetypes. We know that Jung was an INFJ. Obviously. Why? It's all about archetypes. It's all about mythologies. Cognitive functions are not implicitly archetypal in any meaningful sense of the word at all. The archetype part of the thing is just INFJ NI framing of it. My lack of archetypal reference, my not referring to things as the demon and the witch and is my prioritizing a TI framing of it. But I still do like certain aspects of the NI calculus. For example, soundness. I like my calculations because they are sound in the sense that they are resonant, which is, at least on a TI metric, they are communicably defensible. I could work better on making them NIFE resonant in the sense of making videos that are about a single topic, that have examples and emotionality that people can relate to precisely, that are not so abstract, that are not too TI, that are more bonding with other people over ideas. That would be more of an FE soundness approach with NI, Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is Rachel's recent INFJ test that she took. Now, she took a Jungian cognitive function test, and the results came out in these percentages again. Now, she did get the result INFJ, and the percentages she got were 90% NI, 80% FI, 50% FE. What did you get for TI? 35% TI?
45.
45% TI. What did you get for SE, SI, and TE?
Let me get it. I got SI 25%, SE 35%.
TE?
Yeah.
What about TE?
TE 30%.
Okay. So the thing is, presumably those percentages represent out of a maximal possible. If you were to answer this test such that you get maximum TE points, that would be 100. You only got 30 out of 100 TE points, basically. That does not mean, and people mistake this a lot, that Rachel must therefore be NIFI because it went 90-80. It can't be that. It's not possible for a number of reasons that I've articulated elsewhere. It's not possible to be NIFI. To do so would be to have first a knowing function and then a deliberation function. Doesn't make any sense. One knows, in other words, gets to bypass the slower deliberative process because one is interfacing. If you weren't interfacing, you wouldn't need to know, you'd need to act and deliberate. So you can't do that. It can't be a person who is NIFI any more than there can be a person who walks forward by putting their butt forward first. It doesn't make any sense because that's not forward then. It's like that. It's to say that somebody might be NIFI. Regardless, Rachel was also happy because the test said INFJ. She's taken a bunch of tests before. None of them had said INFJ. And she had never been satisfied with the type she had been given. And by these various tests. Somebody might say, well, if she'd never taken a test that showed her INFJ, Eric, then she probably isn't an INFJ. Except the tests that she took before were haphazard in their answers. They said ENFP, they said ENTP, they said ENFJ. They said just about everything but INFJ. So the point is, for her, this matter of which is the singular correct determination of her type is important and matters a lot. And she feels a certain frustration, I think, with the existing tests out there at misleading people, giving them the answers that aren't useful or the wrong answers, and that causes people ontological distress. So,
Yeah, that's why I contacted you for reading. For a typing session, because I really was getting frustrated at the fact that I'd be taking these, personality tests, but there was always something lingering that didn't match up.
so yeah, and then when I typed you, I typed you wrong too. I typed you ENFJ, although I did qualify it some at the end and say, I'm not 100% sure here.
You did.
I'm glad. I can tell the big difference between Rachel after she agreed with the typing that that she was versus before. When she first arrived, and I thought she was an ENFJ, we both kept stubbing our toes on reality. But I thought ENFJs were, now we don't stub our toes on any such thing. And
yeah, no.
It's like, I never found myself going, but I thought INFJs were like, everything fits. I used to constantly stub my metaphysical toe on the SI demonstrations, which were clearly beyond that of any ENFJ. And she described herself when she first arrived as though she had third slot SE. That was very important to her. But again, that's NI doing its thing. She noted from previous experiences that, say, a previous partner had failed to fulfill her need in area Y. So she'd come here and say, it's really important to me that if you say we're going to do something, that you follow through on that. Mm-hmm. Very, very important. And I was like, okay, that sounds more conscious and active than fourth slot SE. It sounds like third slot absolute value SE. That's consistent with the ENFJ. Well, the reality is that's not very important to her at all. From my perspective, she forgets about things I say we're going to do more than I do.
Yeah.
I said we were going to go play poker last night. I was continuing to think about it as I was napping. Should we go? Should we not go? I don't know. Finally said, you know what, Rachel, I don't think we're going to go tonight. Oh, I forgot all about that. So her description of herself as somebody for whom that's important was generalized and universalized from a previous experience into a universal rule about who she is. She couldn't make a universal rule from that about, see, this is how guys are, because she had other experiences that contradicted that. She knew that guys in general weren't like that necessarily, whatever the thing is, But there's also this problem that they have of, if, for example, I am guilty of that one time, that thing, whatever it is, let's say, taking for granted that she's going to clean up my dishes after I eat or something. I don't know. Let's say I were to do that one time because I didn't know it was important to her that I not do that. She would conclude I'm somebody who does that all the time. That's who I am, Well, my point would always be, but hold on a second, communicate with me first that you don't like this, and then I won't do that. I'm not interested in imposing on you. It was a mistake. I didn't know enough, or I forgot, or whatever. Or I might say, actually, I don't think that is an imposition. I think you should have to do that. I might say that, but in that instance, I wouldn't. So, the point is that because of this tendency to make universal rules out of things, from their experience, that can be misleading sometimes. They can be misled about themselves sometimes. They're trying to be communicative toward, like she's been trying to be communicative towards me from the beginning, to give me heads up about shit that's kind of like a deal breaker for her, that's going to bug her a lot or make her mad, or possible problems that might manifest. And the thing is, I've generally tried to listen to those and adhere to them. It backfires at least as often as it doesn't, because the universal rule was derived from something that's not actually the same thing, really, as what I'm doing that might look like it a little bit. So that's the challenge dealing with an NI dom. But it's a lot less challenging because NI doms are susceptible to talking Fundamentally, the NI has got to resonate as communicatively sustainable for an INFJ. In other words, if it doesn't play for anybody else, then it must not. There must be something wrong with it. Of course, part of the challenge for an INFJ who's not necessarily raised in the most supportive environment in the world is they've got to learn to trust their intuition most of the time, even when everybody's disagreeing with them. So, but if you take the right approach, if you take a TI sound, NI sound, and FI sound approach to talking to them about a given limiting universal that doesn't actually apply because of specific particular reasons, or that suggests a qualifying universal, they're open to it and they will update their NI accordingly. After all, it's not dismissing the validity of their NI. It's saying here's another qualifying universal rule to make this universal rule a more complete package of universality. So they are willing and subject to growth through that fashion. Where they are not subject to any sort of growth, as ENTP isn't either, is if they are being like pressured, hammered, pushed, trying to be leveraged, or have utility in the mix. Like, but this is in your interests is not a good argument for an INFJ. They may consider it on their own later, but in the moment, TE is not going to win you any battles with an INFJ, no matter how much something's in their interests. In contrast, appealing to an SI person's interests, probably one of the mistakes I made in my last relationship with ISFJ was I treated her as I would treat an INFJ, which is I'm happy to forgive the particular, provided the universal is updated properly. So if you do something, it was a mistake, no big deal, provided you say the right words about it being a mistake. I also tried to not leverage, not use force, not compel or push or coerce in any way. It probably would have actually been a good idea for me to do the normally toxic behavior of saying, if you don't meow, I will meow, and then follow through on the threat. And of course, I didn't want to be in a relationship with parenting a child like that, you know. But that probably would have been a more successful way of managing an ISFJ's expression of self to render it somewhat less toxic. Now, I'm not saying ISFJs all express this toxic expression of self. It's just, they are defined by their experience. INFJs can easily enough rise above for long stretches of time, and to the extent that they can't grow out of damage, as long as they have the right universals to that support weight, that support metaphysical weight, the right universals that need to be able to, you can stand on them and stomp on them and they don't budge. INFJs then can manifest a more actualized or optimized version of the self pretty well through language-based interventions by themselves, upon themselves, or seeking somebody else or collaborating with somebody else to make such an intervention. ISFJs really have a hard time doing that. NI is falling on deaf ears. You've got to kind of compel them to experience the truths you want them to experience, and then they might come around. Of course, if you do try to compel them and they have a lot of defenses up, then they get spiteful. They get spiteful if you try to say, okay, no, you need to be held accountable. They run and they get spiteful, or they just go full blast on the attack like Kimberly did. She didn't exactly run. She just be like, no, I have nothing to learn from you. I will learn nothing from you. You have nothing to teach me. I know. How do you know? What do you know? I know that I don't feel good right now. Yeah, and so you just think whatever words you want to say about why that is are fine. Like, it's your fault, Eric, because you failed to meet random unstated expectation Z. not why you're feeling this way. You're feeling this way because you've never been able to successfully process damage because you've not dealt with it from an NI level ever. It's always from your experiential level. So if you're experiential knower and you've experienced a bunch of fucking like abuse and shit as a kid, it's a life sentence almost. It's tragic beyond any measure, frankly. But it's not just SI users who are subject to that. It's also FI DOMs, like INFPs, for example. INFP gets abused in childhood. BPD, boom, guaranteed. I mean, most people who get abused in child display some qualities of BPD, but the types who are going to internalize it most are SI DOMs and FI DOMs, and particularly SI DOMs, and both SI DOMs and FINE. At least FISE, it doesn't have to deal with all the ideational wreckage and artifacts that come along with hurt feelings. But she said this and it means this, and this other thing means this, and it's kind of ringing as a time permanent thing in somebody's head, because if they're dealing with the metaphysical aspect of things, then it's turn based. Those realities don't change, those words don't change until somebody comes and says, I didn't mean that, I meant this. Or I'm sorry I said that. I did mean it a little bit, but that's really my fault because of or whatever, whatever it is. So like, I hate the way you laugh, Eric. You always go pia 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 pia, and then the next day the fight's over and I go, I thought you liked the way I laughed. You always told me that before. Well, you got that significant other's got two choices right then. They could be like, actually, I love the way you laugh. I was just in an incredibly shitty mood last night and lying to you. They could say, actually, I have mixed feelings about your laughter. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. And the truth is, last night I didn't like it, and it just blurted out without me knowing. Or the truth is, I mostly do like it, but sometimes I don't. And last night I was in a hurty mood. I wanted to lash out at you, so I said that or something like that. Those kind of meaning processing things have to be attended to in order for a metaphysical type to feel satisfied. They don't necessarily have to be attended to quite so thoroughly if you're not a metaphysical type. If you're not a metaphysical type, maybe makeup sex is good enough, right? It's like she's giving herself to me physically, so the words don't really matter. Talk's cheap. She's spreading her legs. I win. But for metaphysical types, that's never going to be good enough. The words have to be attended to properly, or else it'll bug you forever. Unlike experiences, unlike physical pain or discomfort, it doesn't pass and have its impactfulness removed, because words operate on a turn-based level where they are permanent objects, the status of which can be changed, but until changed, remains the same. Like an object in space, it remains unchanged until acted upon by some form of agency, be it the wind, the rain, a person, whatever. Okay, so hopefully that clears up some things about NI and SI and answers IAG's question in general, and explains about INFJs, and also a little bit about why it is important to get typed correctly, especially if you're an NI-DOM, because you want to have universals about yourself that you can stomp on and support your way. And having the correct typing is one such universal. I fit this archetype, which means the following things necessarily, and these other things are probablys or possiblies, but these things necessarily, that very much resonates on the implicit value of the INFJ, or the INTJ for that matter. So that's my thoughts today on introverted intuition, introverted sensing, the difference between them, and knowledge functions in general. Thanks a lot for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and also don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.